I've always considered my cousin Nate one of the most grounded men I've ever known. He's been in the Coast Guard for over a decade, and he's the type of guy who laughs at ghost stories, calls horror movies a waste of time, and insists that every strange thing in life has a logical explanation. The sea is dangerous enough on its own, he used to tell me. Storms, waves, machinery breaking down, that's all real. You don't need monsters on top of that. For years, I believed him. He was calm, practical, unshakable. But when he told me what happened to him at Matinus Rock Lighthouse in 2017, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Real fear. Matinus Rock was nothing but a jagged chunk of stone jutting out of the ocean, far off the coast of Maine. No trees, no life, no sign of civilization, just an automated lighthouse and a small fuel shed. Usually, maintenance was a solo job, since the beacon mostly ran on its own. But because of some strange electrical failures reported the year before, this time Nate wasn't alone. He was assigned with another guard named Russell. The first few days were ordinary, even dull. They spent daylight hours scraping off corrosion, refilling the diesel tanks, checking the gears and backup batteries. At night, they ate canned food, played cards, and tried to read by the dim generator light. It was isolation, yes, but nothing either of them hadn't expected. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. Around 2 a.m, Nate woke up with a strange heaviness in the air. He described it later like the charged stillness before a thunderstorm, except the sky outside was perfectly clear. When he sat up, he realized something was wrong. The sweeping light of the beacon had stopped turning. That was serious. The lighthouse beam wasn't just decoration, it was a life-saving necessity. He shook Russell awake, and the two of them climbed the spiral stairs to the top. When they got there, they found the gears still grinding, the mechanism still trying to move, but the light was jammed. Stuck in the machinery was something strange, a large, soaked piece of dark fabric, slimy and reeking of seaweed, like it had been pulled from the bottom of the ocean. They stared at it in confusion. The windows were sealed, the door was locked. No way for a bird or the wind to bring it inside. Still, they yanked it out and tossed it outside into the night. They told themselves it was a bizarre coincidence and tried to sleep again. The following night, the same thing happened. At almost exactly 2 a.m, the beacon stopped. When they rushed up, this time they found not a coat but a red scarf, frayed and waterlogged, with tiny barnacles still clinging to it. Nate told me that was the moment his stomach dropped. Coincidence was no longer a possibility. Something was putting these things into the mechanism. From that night on, they double-checked every lock, barricaded the stairwell with crates, and swore they wouldn't let anything slip past them. But the strangeness only escalated. On the 7th night, Nate was half asleep when he heard Russell whispering. Not to him. Russell was mumbling softly toward the corner of the room, like someone else was standing there. When Nate asked what he was saying, Russell blinked in confusion and swore he hadn't spoken at all. Later, Nate woke again to find Russell sitting at the window, eyes locked on the rocks below. When he asked what he was doing, Russell whispered that he'd seen someone standing out there, just at the edge of the beacon swing, watching them dot. By the 9th night, Russell was deteriorating. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, just stared out the window and muttered about noises in the walls. That night, both of them heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, coming down the stairs from the beacon room above. Nate looked at Russell, who was standing frozen at the bottom of the stairs. Neither of them had gone up. The steps stopped, and the silence afterward was worse than the sound. That night, they dragged a dresser in front of their door and slept with knives under their pillows. On the 11th night, the horror reached its peak. Again, the beacon failed. When they arrived at the top, the door to the beacon room was wide open, swinging in the howling wind. Inside, the light wasn't just stuck, it had been dismantled. The massive industrial bulb had been unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the floor, as though someone had carefully set it there. Nate froze. No human could have gotten in there without them knowing. No human should have been able to move that bulb so easily. Then something brushed against his back. Cold, deliberate. He spun, but no one was there. Russell, pale as chalk, pointed to the wall, his voice trembling. I just saw a hand come out of the bricks. That was enough. At first light, Nate grabbed the emergency sat phone and called for early extraction, saying only that there had been a serious mechanical failure. The boat didn't arrive until afternoon, but when the crew pulled up, they said something that still haunts him. "Why'd you call us at 2:12 this morning?" One of the deckhands asked. Nate shook his head. I didn't touch the phone until daylight. But they insisted. They'd received a garbled distress call just after 2, full of static and a faint voice saying, "Someone's here with us." Nate swears to this day that he never made that call. He still does lighthouse duty sometimes, but he told me he'll never return to Matinous Rock. As for Russell, he quit the Coast Guard within months and never spoke of it again. And when Nate first told me this story, the most unsettling thing wasn't the words themselves, but the way he told it. My cousin, the man who never flinched at storms, who once laughed at ghost stories, had a look in his eyes like he was still there, staring at that wall, waiting for the hand to push through again. I should start by saying I've never been the type to go looking for trouble. I was the kind of guy who liked simple nights movies, a couple of drinks, maybe hanging out with friends. But lockdown changed everything. Days blurred into nights, weeks into months, and loneliness had a way of pushing me to make choices I wouldn't normally make. That's how I ended up talking to Sophia again. She'd been someone I'd followed on Instagram for years, funny posts, pretty smile, seemed like she lived on adventure. One boring Tuesday night, after a few drinks and too many hours scrolling my phone, I sent her a message. To my surprise, she replied. We started chatting, joking around, and within the hour she suggested we meet up. "Let's go somewhere fun," she said. "Something different." At first I laughed it off. Everything was closed. Bars, restaurants, parks, even the beaches had restrictions. But she had something else in mind. "You ever been to Montauk Lighthouse at night?" I told her no, and she grinned like she had been waiting for that answer. "Then that's where we're going." It sounded reckless, sure, but maybe that was the point. After months of being locked away, the idea of sneaking into a closed-off lighthouse felt exciting. Dangerous in the right kind of way. So I picked her up, and with a couple cans of White Claw in hand, we drove out to the far end of Long Island. The place was deserted. The parking lot was empty, the ticket booth shuttered, not a single car in sight. Sophia told me not to worry, that she'd been there before, that security never came around on weeknights. She had this air of confidence about her, like rules didn't apply if she didn't want them to. We hopped the low fence and walked up the path. Seeing the lighthouse loom above us in the dark was surreal. I'd only ever seen them in pictures, bright and noble against the sea. But up close, under the sweep of the beam, it was eerie. The tower looked less like a guide and more like a warning. Sophia led the way around back to the cliff trail. Rocks jutted out from the coastline, forming a narrow path. The sea roared below us, black and endless. We lit our way with our phone flashlights, the beams cutting through the mist. It felt exciting, stupid, yes, but exciting. Then Sophia stopped. "Do you hear that?" At first I thought she meant the ocean. But then I realized she wasn't listening to the waves. She was pointing her light behind us. That's when I saw him. A man stood on the rocks, about 20 feet back. Hood pulled over his head, hands in his pockets, unmoving. My first thought was security, and my heart sank. I stammered something about leaving, about being sorry, but the man didn't move, didn't say a word. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "You want to buy some coke?" It should have been funny. Relief, even it, meant he wasn't security, just some shady guy hanging around. But instead of easing my nerves, it made them worse. Why was he here, in the middle of nowhere, at night, watching us? I told him no, quickly, and motioned for Sophia to keep walking. She slipped past me, and I followed behind her, keeping my light angled back at the man, and then he started moving, not toward us, exactly just walking when we walked, stopping when we stopped, always keeping the same distance. We sped up, so did he. We slowed down, so did he. He never spoke again, never called out. Just followed. By the time we reached the end of the cliff path, my chest was tight with panic. We hurried through the grass back toward the parking lot, our footsteps crunching loud in the silence. When I looked back, the man was still there, still following, but now there were two more shapes behind him. Sophia's hand found mine. Her nails dug into my palm. "Just keep walking," she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't want them to know I was scared, but my whole body was screaming. We reached the car, fumbling with the doors, when I realized how close they were. The three men were practically on top of us now, shadows under the sweep of the lighthouse beam. One yanked at the back door handle just as I locked it. Another slammed a fist against the window. Sophia screamed. I threw the car in reverse, jerking back as they pounded against the glass. One of them kicked the bumper hard enough to shake the car, but I didn't stop. I reversed all the way to the exit and sped down the road without looking back. We didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was my heartbeat and the distant roar of the ocean fading behind us. Finally, Sophia said quietly, "They weren't security. They weren't dealers. They were waiting for someone." Her words chilled me, because she was right. When I dropped her off later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling. My hands trembled on the steering wheel all the way home. I barely slept, replaying the scene over and over. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for news about Montauk Lighthouse. Buried in old articles, I found what I didn't want to see in the 1980s. There had been a string of gang-related murders near the cliffs. Victims lured out late at night, bodies never recovered. Locals whispered about the Cliff Gang, a group that claimed the lighthouse as their hunting ground. Most people dismissed it as rumor, a story to scare off trespassers. But reading it, I felt my stomach sink. Those men weren't there by chance. They weren't there to sell drugs. They were continuing something older, something darker. Sophia and I hung out again after that, but neither of us ever suggested going back. Even now, years later, when I see a picture of Montauk Lighthouse, my chest tightens. because I can still see them, three silent figures in the dark, waiting, patient, like they had all the time in the world. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the words whispered in my ear. Where are you going? I was in my 50s when it happened, and by then I thought I'd seen everything the sea could throw at me. Storms, capsized barges, wrecked piers, collapsed dockside, built and repaired enough along the coast to believe nothing could surprise me anymore. So when the county hired me to inspect an old, decommissioned lighthouse off Washington State, I treated it like any other job. The plan was simple: 3 days, maybe 4. I'd check the structure, write a report on whether it could be restored or if it was too far gone, and call for pickup. I'd done it dozens of times before. No reason to expect this would be any different. The place didn't even have a name on the records, just coordinates scribbled on the contract. When the small Coast Guard boat dropped me off on that bare rock, I remember thinking how lonely it looked. Just the lighthouse, a rusted generator shed, and the sea pressing in on all sides. No dock, no birds, not even the usual smell of salt and gulls. Just stone, steel, and silence. The first day was uneventful. I checked the beams, the spiral staircase, the windows. The lighthouse was elderly, 1900s, maybe, but solid enough. The upper floors creaked, but nothing unusual. I set my sleeping bag near the generator room on the ground floor, where it was warmest, and fell asleep to the soft hum of the wind. The second day, the fog rolled in, not the ordinary kind that drifts and shifts with the breeze. This fog was thick, dense, a wall of white outside every window. I could barely see more than a few feet. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. Halfway up the stairwell, there was a maintenance closet built into the wall. I'd tried to open it the day before, but the hinges were so corroded it wouldn't budge. Now, the door stood open, just a crack, wide enough to see the dark inside. I don't know why, but my stomach turned. Slowly, I pushed it open. Inside, in the back corner, was a small wooden box, no bigger than a lunch pail. Damp. Moss clung to it like it had been underwater for years. I didn't open it. Just shut the door, wrote a note to mention it later, and tried to shake it off. That night, I woke to silence. Not the ordinary kind you get in isolation, but a silence that pressed down on you, that made your ears strain for something, anything. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs above me. I froze. Animals, maybe, I thought, but these steps weren't scurrying or light. They were slow, human, and they were climbing upward, away from me. I waited with the flashlight in my hand, staring at the stairwell entrance, but nothing appeared. Eventually, the sound stopped. I lay awake until dawn. On the third day, I searched the whole place top to bottom. Nothing, no sign of intruders, no animals, no reason for what I'd heard. Except the box. It was no longer inside the closet. It was sitting halfway out into the stairwell, damp wood glistening in the weak light. I stood there for a long time, debating. Then I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, waterlogged, the lid nailed shut. I didn't force it. I just set it at the bottom of the stairs and stepped outside for air. That's when I saw the footprints. In the mud around the base of the lighthouse were a series of impressions, bare feet, wet, leading from the north side toward the cliff edge. 10, maybe 12 steps. And then they stopped. right at the edge. No return tracks, no boat, no body. Just the sea below. I locked every hatch, shoved an iron bar against the stairwell door, and told myself I just needed one more night at 1:30 a.m. I woke to a slam so loud the dust shook loose from the ceiling. The beacon room door above had been thrown shut, and then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not at the front door, not on the window, on the wall. From inside the wall, I lay there, frozen, heart pounding, staring at the bricks as if something might push through. Eventually, the sound stopped. I don't know if I slept again. By morning, the box was gone. The closet door was wide open. That was enough. I called for immediate extraction, telling the Coast Guard it was a medical issue. They said it would take hours. So I packed, sat by the landing ledge, and waited. The fog never lifted. The world outside was a blank sheet. At one point, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised, but there was nothing. Or maybe I just couldn't see through the fog. 7 hours later, the boat finally arrived. They pulled me aboard at sunset, and the deckhand asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I just told him the lighthouse was unsafe, that it should be sealed off. That was all I put in my report. I didn't mention the box, or the footprints, or the knocking. I could have. I should have. But as I sat in the office, filing my notes, all I could think about was how the box had followed me out of the closet, how it seemed to move on its own. And I wondered what might have happened if I'd pried it open. I never took another field contract after that. I told people it was age, health, the long commute. But the truth is, that lighthouse changed me. It wasn't just fear, it was understanding. Some places aren't broken because of time or weather. Some places are broken because they're meant to be left that way. And if you try to fix them, they'll fix you instead. They say when you work dispatch long enough, you stop hearing the voices. They blur together into static and routine weather reports, vessel logs, broken calls from ships trying to find safe harbor. I thought I'd heard it all. Until that night, it was just past midnight. The kind of storm that rattles glass and makes the horizon vanish into black. My console flickered under fluorescent light. The steady hum of machines, my only company. Then the signal cut through the static weak, fractured but human. Light failing. Storm rising. There inside the walls. I froze, pen halfway to the logbook. The voice was male, low, desperate. I leaned closer. Heart pounding, the call sign was Bracken's Reef Lighthouse. That shouldn't have been possible. Bracken's Reef had been abandoned since 1972. The lantern dismantled. Power lines severed. The station condemned and shuttered by the Coast Guard before I was even born. There was no equipment left to transmit from, and yet, here it was. Say again, Bracken's Reef. I whispered into the mic. My voice cracked. Repeat your message, the radio hissed. For a moment, only silence. Then, help me. They don't leave. And behind the words, I heard it faint, wet, dragging sounds. Something breathing, heavy, ragged, like lungs drowning in salt water. The hairs on my arms rose. My stomach twisted. I pressed record. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The voice came again, fractured this time, weaker. Keep the light. Keep the watch. There in the walls. Then, A scream so sharp it clipped the feed. Static swallowed the signal whole. I sat there, staring at the console. My coffee had gone cold. My own reflection in the dark window looked pale, wide-eyed, not mine at all. By morning, I convinced myself there was an explanation. A prank, pirate frequency, old wiring picking up interference. Something rational, something safe, but the words looped in my mind. They don't leave. I had to see for myself. Bracken's Reef stood 2 hours up the coast, tucked into a cliffside where the sea chewed at the land like a starving animal. The sky was iron grey when I parked near the headland, the air heavy with salt. My car door groaned as I shoved it open, wind stinging my face. The lighthouse loomed a head-thick stone walls blackened by time. Lantern chamber shattered, iron stairs clinging to the outside like broken ribs. Its keeper's house sagged beside it, roof caved in. The entire place smelled of rust and seawater rot. I told myself I wouldn't go inside. Just stand there, take a picture, prove it was still as dead as the records said. But when I lifted my camera, my handheld radio crackled to life. No power, no signal, and yet his voice, live, raw, choking with panic. They don't leave. They don't leave. They don't. It cut off in another scream. The same one I'd recorded. My blood turned to ice. I forced myself toward the lighthouse door. It hung half open, its paint blistered and flaking. I pushed, and the hinges moaned. The corridor smelled of mold, cold stone, and something wetter. The floor squelched under my boots. Seawater. No, the tide couldn't reach this high. I pulled my flashlight and swept the beam across peeling walls. Rust stains streaked downward, but some looked darker, fresher, like handprints dragged through blood. My breath fogged in front of me. Every step echoed, and then I heard it knocking. Not random, not wind. A rhythm, slow and deliberate, from inside the walls. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 more. Silence. My flashlight shook in my hand. I whispered to myself, it's rats. Just rats. But rats don't knock. I climbed the spiral staircase, metal groaning under my weight. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, trailing down the walls in veins. My beam caught movement above a shadow shifting across the lantern chamber. I froze. Hello. My voice cracked. Nothing. The radio in my pocket hissed. Keep the light. Keep the watch. I almost turned back. Almost ran. But something pulled me upward. At the top, the lantern chamber yawned open. Shattered glass panes framed the stormy horizon. My boots crunched against shards scattered across the floor. The great beacon was gone, dismantled. Decades ago, but in the center of the chamber sat an object, an antique Morse key. Its brass was tarnished black, corroded from age, but it clicked faintly by itself. The lever tapping, though no hand touched it. My throat tightened. My stomach churned. I stepped closer. Click, click, click. I recognized the pattern. SOS. I leaned down. My breath hitched. The key was wet. Salt water dripped from it, pooling on the metal floor, and reflected in that pool was not me. It was a man in an old keeper's uniform, his face hollow, eyes black, mouth moving soundlessly, his hands pressed against the floor as though trying to climb up out of the reflection. I staggered back. My flashlight clattered. The radio in my pocket screamed with static, so loud it felt alive. They don't leave. The voice moaned, distorted, layered now with others, men, women, Dozens of them. They don't leave. They don't leave. They don't leave. The walls pulsed, dark water seeping from cracks between the stones, running faster, spreading across the floor. Footsteps circled the stairwell, multiple heavy. Closing in, I bolted. My boots pounded the iron steps, water splashing beneath me. The footsteps thundering behind, chasing me down. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The door slammed as I burst into the storm. My lungs burned, my chest heaved. But I didn't stop until I reached the car. I jammed the key into the ignition. Nothing dead. I screamed, slammed the wheel, tried again and again. Still nothing, and then the radio, still powerless, came alive one final time. His voice, that same terrible voice. They don't leave. The words repeated, faster, louder, until they weren't words at all, but screams layered over screams. I shoved the door open and ran into the storm, along the cliff, not stopping until my legs gave out by dawn. I'd staggered into a small village 10 miles away. A fisherman found me, drenched and half frozen. He asked what had happened. I couldn't answer. I never went back to Bracken's Reef, but sometimes, when storms sweep the coast, I wake to static. My radio hisses, even though it's unplugged, and beneath the static, faint but growing louder, I hear it again. They don't leave. They don't leave. They don't leave. And every time, I know they're right.
I don't tell this story much anymore. People look at me differently when I do, like I'm fragile, or drunk, or losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I can't keep it bottled up forever. So, here it is. It started after the storm. 3 days at sea, caught in black water, the kind that chews you up and spits you out in pieces. Our boat didn't survive it. Most of my crew didn't either. There were 9 of us when we left port. Only 4 of us made it to the lighthouse. I don't even know if I can call it salvation. The place looked abandoned, doors hanging open, shutters rusted, no fire, no warmth, but it had walls and a roof, and that was enough. We lit what we could, huddled together, and told ourselves we'd made it. We were alive. The first night, I thought I heard something outside. Not wind, not waves, something softer, stranger. I told myself it was exhaustion. Nothing more. But on the second night, the others heard it too. Voices. They floated up from the rocks below the cliffs. Women's voices, soft and low, like lullabies. At first I thought it was the wind carrying sounds from the sea. But no, the words were too clear. Even if I didn't understand them, they weren't English, weren't any language I knew. They rose and fell in patterns that pulled at you, like the tide pulling at your body when you wade too deep. I remember Tommy Poor. Sweet Tommy getting up and walking to the door. His eyes, they weren't right. Glossy, empty, like the sea had hollowed him out. He whispered, "They're calling me." I grabbed his arm, begged him to sit down, but he fought me, stronger than I'd ever seen him. The others helped drag him back, bolt the door, but the voices never stopped. All night they circled us, lilting, coaxing, promising something I didn't dare imagine. By morning, we were shattered. No one had slept. The next night, Tommy was gone. We woke to the door wide open, cold wind howling through. Bare footprints led down the steps, across the wet stone, right to the cliff's edge. And then nothing, just the waves below. I called his name until my throat bled, but the sea swallowed me whole with its silence. After that, I knew we weren't going to leave the lighthouse hole. The voices grew louder, not just singing now, but whispering our names, mine, over and over, like they were already inside my head. I saw Hansius. I know what I saw, pressing against the window glass, sliding down with trails of wetness. One of the men said he felt knocking beneath the floorboards, like someone trapped beneath the stone. We stopped lighting the fire. It only seemed to draw them closer. We huddled in the dark, clutching knives we had no courage to use. On the 5th night, the lantern went out. We'd trimmed it, fueled it, but still it died. The moment it went dark, the voices screamed, not gentle, not coaxing anymore, screamed like the sea itself was tearing open. Jack broke first. He bolted up the stairs, shouting that he'd relight the beacon, that he'd drive them away. I tried to follow, but the sound it crushed me down. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His footsteps faded above, and then, nothing. Silence. Morning came, and it was just two of us. We didn't speak. We couldn't. We packed what little food remained and prayed for rescue. By some miracle, a trawler spotted our flare 2 days later. When they pulled me aboard, I couldn't answer their questions. Where are the others? What happened? I opened my mouth, but the only sound I heard was the ocean. And even now, years later, I still hear it. The voices. Sometimes they sing me awake at night. Sometimes I find water pooled on the floor, salt water, though the roof doesn't leak. I tell myself it's my imagination, that I brought it back with me, carried it out of that lighthouse like a disease. But deep down, I know the truth. They never stopped calling, and one day, I'm afraid I'll answer.
I had no reason to be out there that night, except curiosity. The old fisherman in town had been whispering for years that the abandoned North Shoal lighthouse wasn't truly dead. It had been decommissioned in the late 70s, the wiring stripped, the lanterns smashed by storms, but, according to them, during heavy weather you could still see its beams sweep across the water, and if you tuned the right frequency on your radio, you'd hear it calling. I didn't believe them. Not at first. The first time I saw the light, I was anchored 2 miles offshore. A storm had rolled in, fast wind howling, rain beating down so hard it blurred the horizon. And then, through that chaos, I saw it, a faint, pale beam turning slowly across the waves. My chest tightened. It wasn't possible. That tower had been rotting for decades. But there it was. A steady rotation, as if some keeper had climbed up there to tend the flame. I turned on my radio out of instinct. Static filled the cabin, but underneath it, God, I'll never forget, it came the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Morse code. I hadn't practiced it in years, but even half forgotten, I could tell what it was spelling. SOS. Over and over, repeating with the storm. When the thunder eased for a moment, I leaned closer to the receiver. The rhythm shifted, faster, uneven, almost frantic. And this time the words were different. I wrote them down with shaking hands. We are still here. My skin went cold. The beam vanished minutes later, swallowed by rain, and the radio fell silent. I should have left it at that, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about it all the next day. No one else had seen it. No one else admitted to hearing a thing. They laughed when I told them, shook their heads, said the sea had a way of tricking men. But I knew what I'd seen. 2 nights later, I went back. The weather was calm this time, the sea as flat as black glass. I anchored closer, almost beneath the rusted iron legs of the lighthouse. It looked like a skeleton rising from the water, its lantern chamber shattered, its stairs eaten by salt and rust. I stared up at it, trying to imagine how anything could still burn inside. That's when my radio hissed. Not static. Not at first. Just a low, broken hum, like a voice caught behind a wall. I turned the dials slowly until the sound sharpened. And then I heard it. Not Morse now. Not clicks. A voice, the words were warped, dragged through static, but I understood them all the same. Keep the light. Keep the watch. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming to move, to run. But I couldn't. My eyes lifted to the lantern chamber, and I swear on my life there was a glow inside. Faint orange, shifting like flame. The beam didn't sweep, not fully. It just pulsed, a heartbeat of light. And in that heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure moving. Someone standing behind the broken glass. Looking down at me, the voice on the radio cracked, rose higher, turned to static, then to something else. Footsteps. Slow, metallic. As if someone was climbing the iron stairs inside the tower. The glow went out. The radio fell silent. I don't remember pulling up anchor. I don't remember steering back to shore. All I know is that I stumbled into the harbor at dawn, hands trembling, shirt damp with sweat though the night had been cold. I've never gone back, but sometimes, when storms sweep through, I still turn my radio to that frequency. I tell myself I won't hear anything. I tell myself the tower is dead, that no one could be up there, and then, faintly, through the static, I hear it again. We are still here.
I don't remember when I first saw it. That's the part that troubles me most. Usually memories cling to moments, dates, times, weather, what you were doing before. But this one has no anchor. It's as if the lighthouse was always there, waiting in the fog, and I simply stumbled into it. I was driving the coastal road late at night, chasing photographs. That was my habit back then, long exposures of the ocean, storm clouds, the way light bent through mist. I pulled over at a turnout I'd passed a dozen times, and there it was, a tower rising from the cliffs, pale and sharp against the moon dot. It shouldn't have been there. I know that stretch of road. I'd driven it hundreds of times. There's nothing but rocks and grass. No structure. No keeper's house, nothing. And yet that night, the lighthouse stood tall and whole, its beams sweeping across the black water dot. Something in me decided to capture it. I set up the tripod, adjusted the lens, and snapped frame after frame. The tower glowed with impossible clarity, brighter than the stars. For a moment, I felt dizzy, as though the light was passing not just over the sea, but through me. When I lowered the camera, the beam slowed, hung, stopped. It froze on me, blinding, white-hot. And in that brightness, I swore, I saw shapes moving inside the glass figures, shadows circling the lantern. One turned, paused, and though I could not see its face, I knew it was watching me. The next thing I remember is waking in my car. Dawn, camera on the passenger seat. My hands shaking, I told myself it was a dream. It had to be. But when I checked the memory card, my throat went dry. Every frame was there, sharp, detailed, the lighthouse beam cutting across the sky. The shadows in the glass, only when I showed them to others, they shook their heads. It's just the cliffs, they said. Blur from your exposure. You must have imagined the rest. No one else could see it. I returned a week later. Same turnout, same cliffs. But the tower was gone. Nothing but empty rock, grass bending in the wind. I drove the road end to end. No lighthouse dot. I checked maps, archives, even county records. Nothing. Not a single mention of a lighthouse ever being built there. Still, the pictures remain. I've looked at them 1,000 times. And each time, something shifts. At first it was subtle. A light in a window that hadn't been there before. A darker shadow behind the glass. Then, weeks later, a figure at the base of the stairs, faint, blurred, but facing the camera. Now, when I scroll through the set, I swear the images don't stay the same. The figure is closer in some, further in others, as though it moves when I'm not watching, and sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night deep, I hear the sound of a distant foghorn, though I live miles inland. My walls tremble faintly, as though brushed by waves. I don't drive that road anymore, but there's one last thing. Something I can't explain. Last month, I printed one of the photographs, large, to hang on my wall. When I stepped back to look at it, I felt my stomach drop. The figure in the glass, it wasn't faint anymore. It wasn't blurred dot, it was me.